Good evening. My name is Jordan Paul. I am the president of BC Rebuilding Together Boston, a volunteer organization which repairs homes throughout the greater Boston area. I started this club on campus with a group of students who believe that all people deserve a safe and healthy place to live. Today's event is important to our members, and so we are pleased to co-sponsor this event today with the Corcoran Center for Real Estate and Urban Action. The Corcoran Center was endowed by the late Joseph E. Corcoran 10 years ago. The Corcoran Center started as a single class hosted in the Carroll School of Management. Today, the center's interdisciplinary engagement has grown to 10 classes, an internship program, an annual case competition, and on and off-campus engagement, including events like this, the second annual Real Estate Week. I will briefly introduce our guests tonight. Tonight, we are fortunate to have three leaders who represent the government, the nonprofit sector, and the for-profit sector that serve the housing industry. I encourage you to use the QR code at the front of the room for their full bios. Kate Bennett is the former housing director of Boston Housing Authority. Rodger Brown is the managing director of POAH, Preservation of Affordable Housing, a nonprofit housing developer headquartered here in Boston. And Drew Colbert is the vice president of development for WinnCompanies. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Brigid, co-president of the Undergraduate Real Estate Council of Boston College. Please join me in welcoming Kate Bennett, Rodger Brown, and Andrew Colbert.
Thank you, Jordan, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today. To start off our conversation, as Jordan mentioned, you all work in a different realm of the affordable housing industry. I would love to hear from each of your perspectives why mixed income housing is so important today, especially in the Boston market.
Well, hello, everybody. I think mixed income housing, has sort of shifted over time in terms of the definition of what that is. I think of it very much as an umbrella term for a lot of different models of, mixing market and affordable housing. And so we've all been involved in projects that are majority market with a more minor affordable component. We've been involved in projects that have a majority of affordable units with a smaller market component. I think there are different angles to look at it in terms of the importance of mixed income housing going forward. Financial is a key one. I mean, a lot of the reason that at the Housing Authority, where we're in the exclusive business of providing affordable housing to low-income folks, that we engaged in building mixed-income housing. And a big reason for that was finance. We needed to use the leverage of the market and the private sector to help build or rebuild or renovate affordable units. So I think that's one consideration. Over time, there have been social considerations. The model of public housing in this country is not that popular. Many of you, regardless of where you grew up, may be familiar with public housing developments, either locally or nationally, that are, largely distressed and not working all that well. And so I think mixed income housing has been thought of as a solution or an antidote for 100% affordable housing where there is a level of deep poverty that's very pervasive at the site. And I think there are a variety of other reasons to consider mixed income housing, but I think it's important to think about really what kind of mix you're talking about when you talk about mixed income housing. In my view, even 0 to 80% of area median, which is the eligibility for many affordable housing programs throughout the city and nation, is a huge mix. When you think of somebody that's earning nothing or is on complete subsidy versus somebody that's earning 80% of median income, that's really a full working family. There's a real mix there. And so I think it's just good to sort of really drill down in terms of what specifically you're talking about when you're looking at a mixed income development.
Thanks, Kate. I would say, I've been doing affordable housing work for about 40 years, and I've had the privilege of doing it in a number of different geographies, Boston included. This is where I live, but also doing significant work in Washington, D.C., and Chicago, and Florida. A lot of my experience, particularly early in my career, was focused in communities of color where the resources available to create affordable housing were targeted because that's where folks who of limited means where they live. Now in Boston, that's additionally layered on and complicated by the history of a city that's extremely segregated by income and by race. And one of the results of that I've experienced, not only in Boston, but in those other geographies, is that the things that make stable, healthy communities get lost or never get created when we're only serving one small, limited slice of the income spectrum. So the lack of retail, the lack of grocery, the lack of some cultural institutions really make it hard to have a sustainable community. And when that happens, then the opportunities for economic advancement of the families who live in those communities are severely limited unless there's some pretty significant intervention. Some of those interventions we're doing now, but as it relates to mixed income housing, the opportunity to be intentional about creating communities that have opportunities to live for people of a range of incomes gives us the opportunity to create economic development opportunities, to address food deficit situations, which we can talk about later, to hopefully create some economic opportunities and educational opportunities for the kids who live there. And I'll leave it.
So I've had the great opportunity of learning from Kate and Rodger. I've only been in the affordable housing or mixed income housing space for 10 years, so a fraction of the two of them. No. No, I'm saying there's a lot that I've yet to learn. But I think the greatest impact in mixed income communities is that it's a community for all, right? It's a space where children, regardless of background or economic means, play in a community room or play at the playground or go to the same daycare. It's where parents or adults living in that housing development share spaces, they make relationships, they create lifelong friendships, with their neighbors and people in their community. Those communities that we thoughtfully seek to develop and create are addressing, many of the issues that exist, when you create economically segregated neighborhoods, right? You have the perpetual disinvestment around those communities. You have the inability, the lack of opportunity, whether that's, for education or it's for jobs. That's not to say that we need to continue to invest in those communities because they provide such an important resource, an affordable housing resource. But the mixed income nature, we've seen that model just be a lot more successful in delivering, the resources from childcare to resident services, to workforce opportunities, to educational opportunities, in not only an individual development, but also a broader neighborhood where that focused work takes place.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your perspective. Kate, you kind of touched on this, but as much as we know what area median income means and how it's applied in mixed income housing developments today, could you all explain a little bit more what that means in real life scenarios with developments today?
Sure. So, the concept of area median income, I think probably you're familiar with. It's just based on census data, and it's a regional description of what the median income levels are in that area. And most affordable housing programs that are funded either through the federal or the state government take a percentage of that median to base eligibility on for their programs. So for instance, in public housing, the eligibility for public housing is 80% of area median and below. In Boston, area median is about $93,000 per family or per household. And so 80% of that becomes the level, and it varies by family size and bedroom size and things like that. But for public housing, it's 80% of that. For the tax credit program, it's 60% of that. For the Section 8 program, it's mostly about 50% of that. And so that becomes the threshold by which folks can access those affordable housing programs. And so in mixed income housing, there's typically one of those programs along with, or other state-funded affordable housing programs, along with a market program which has no eligibility restrictions. It's just, a rent is set and it's open market. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, and not to add any more detail, but Kate and I worked on a project that's now in construction in Boston that is a mixture of public housing, where we think about public housing residents having between 0 and 30% of AMI. And then there's tax credit, which because of some changes in the tax credit rules go up to about 80% because we're doing income averaging. So it's kind of 30 to 80%. And then in Massachusetts, we were fortunate enough that our state housing finance agency created a program to provide an capital subsidy to create housing units that they're called workforce housing units, but that's probably not such a great name. But in any case, we call it the missing middle. That takes us from about 80% of AMI up to about 110 or 120, depending on the location and the negotiation we have with the housing finance agency. And then the unrestricted units are above 110 or 120, whatever the market will bear. And in that case, we've probably got something like 70% of the units are affordable, below 80% of AMI, and then the 30% are on top. That project happens to be in a very good location for mass transit and for jobs and proximity to university. So we expect it to be very successful and in great demand when it comes online.
Just want to add, there's the funding program that Mass Housing created is one of the only ones in the country to create units at the missing middle at 80 to 120%. I completed a project just a couple years ago on the other side of the hill on Com Ave that is 70% tax credit units, including a pretty significant number of vouchers because the community was designated for veterans. So there's a special voucher program called VASH vouchers for veterans. And so we have units at 30% AMI, tax credit units up to 60% AMI, and then the moderate income units. And it's such an interesting and dynamic community where, we have disabled households that are living on fixed incomes, who are neighbors with one of the residents was a recent BC grad who went through the ROTC program and ended up being deployed and finishing their school late and, works at one of the big banks downtown. But all in one community with that similar mission, all of them are, have served or are actively serving. And, Massachusetts is a leader in creating dynamic programs like that to create healthy communities.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. It goes without saying that in Boston today, there's a lot of opposition surrounding the development of affordable housing in some neighborhoods due to some cultural reasons, as well as people not wanting to live in mixed income housing. In all of your opinions, how do you think that these concerns need to be addressed today?
Okay, I'll start. We'll change the order. From my perspective, one of the most significant things that can happen is some education. I mean, there's kind of the community engagement work that has to happen anyway in any project. But in a lot of communities, people really don't have a good idea of what affordable housing is or who's eligible to live there. Now, I actually went online. I haven't lost that skill yet, and to see what the AMI in Boston was before I came. And for a family of 4, at least according to the website I was looking at, and I think on a couple more, I couldn't believe the number, the 100% AMI for a family of 4 was $153,000. Is that right?
That is.
I see a shaking head out there, which is an astounding number. Think about that for a second. 100% AMI for a family of 4 is $153,000. So if you are an entry-level police cadet or a fireman or a young teacher or 2 teachers living together trying to find a place to live, turns out you're eligible for affordable housing. And so when we run those numbers in certain communities and share that level with the folks, in cities, sometimes they change their mind about whether they want it in their town or not because they realize that the people that are teaching their kids and keeping them safe and keeping their houses from burning down really can't even afford to live in the town where they work. So that's a little bit helpful. I can't explain what happened in Milton.
When we were having a pre-call to discuss this evening, one of the ideas that we kicked around is a college campus is a mixed income community, right? Where everyone, whether they share a wall in a dorm room, they come from different backgrounds, they come from different economic means, but it's a shared experience. And creating mixed income housing is not too different. But it often comes with, but the trees or but the traffic. This is important, and it's a challenge every day. Especially depending on certain communities in which you're working. But to Rodger's point, being able to have a story that goes along with the homes that you're creating and who you're creating them for, it really helps people understand the message. I think about where I live in Somerville. There's triple deckers and there's 2 families and there's single families all on one street, and there's a range of incomes and there's a range of housing tenure between me and my neighbors. We're a mixed income housing community. My little block in Davis Square, just like name a BC dorm, is a mixed income housing community.
I think neighborhood dynamics are incredibly intense in every neighborhood, and that's certainly true in Boston. We've done projects, in many different neighborhoods across the city, and there's really, I think, different issues and objections and sort of fights with every project that vary. In some communities, citing affordable housing is hard because people just simply don't want poor people in that community, and they can be shockingly open and vocal, about that. In some communities, there's a welcoming of affordable housing, primarily because people are trying to stay in the neighborhood they grew up in. And so there's a sensitivity and an understanding that there has to be something other than market forces working in their neighborhood in order for their families or their kids to stay or buy houses. Other times I've had affordable housing welcomed because it means that a blighted development is going to be renovated, and what is a very distressed situation that is bringing the neighborhood down in their view is going to go away, and in its place there's going to be attractive new housing, and the fact that it's affordable housing is okay to them. They just want that sort of physical change in their neighborhood. And some neighborhoods feel like, you know what, we've had a lot of affordable housing built around us in the last number of decades, and we need some other neighborhoods to absorb new housing. We don't need affordable housing, not because we hate affordable housing, but because we've seen a ton of it built here, but we've never seen it built in that neighborhood that's a mile away. So I think it's really, community process around building affordable housing really varies. And, one of the reasons I think these guys have partnered so well with the city and the housing authority and with some of these deals is that they're really willing to kind of get into the weeds in that neighborhood and understand those dynamics and understand, and as they've suggested, kind of walk people through what it means and what it doesn't mean to build a particular development.
I gotta make Kate, you kind of just touched on this, but there are a lot of feasibility issues with affordable housing in Boston today. I did some number crunching today as well, and it costs about $700,000 to build one affordable housing unit in Massachusetts today. So in all of your perspectives, what are some feasibility studies or legislation that's in action today that can help combat these feasibility issues?
Yeah, you're hitting on the most critical issue, I think, in terms of being able to build out affordable housing and even mixed income communities, because the cost of construction has approached the point where market housing really can't even help build affordable housing, because market housing is just breaking even itself at this point. And so the gap in terms of what it costs to build a unit and what can be brought in through rents or sale of that unit is just ever increasing. And it seems crazy. It's the first thought you might have in hearing that is why don't we just buy everyone a single family home if that's what it's going to cost to do these deals where units cost $700,000? But that is a reality, and I hope that there can be more work on this going forward to really try to significantly impact those costs. I mean, it's been an issue throughout my professional life. It means getting the city, developers, the unions, and many others together to try to come up with some other model of putting this stuff up. Modular construction and panelized construction is a partial answer. It's not always easy to do that in the city of Boston. A little easier in some other communities, but I think too often the challenge of affordable housing kind of rolls forward without that piece of it really being addressed at all.
Wow, that's a big question. Let me take a shot. We're building actually 3 interesting projects in and around Boston now. One that I started with Kate, that building is going to cost us about $865,000 a unit when it's all said and done, and probably one of the more significant cost drivers there. One was the building type, because we want to go high rise. We have to be sustainable, and that drives the cost. And the politics of having to build union was a premium on top of that. So, from a relief perspective, I would say, from a policy perspective, if we could have flexibility around wage scales, would help us out. In other jurisdictions, we don't have a union issue, like in Washington, D.C. It's not a big union town, so we get to use the full range of subcontractors that are available to us, and that helps in a number of ways. Keeps the cost down, and it also allows me to hire local subcontractors and general contractors who are not captured by the union. Because in Boston, that's kind of a thing. They have a long history of excluding people of color, people in the neighborhood. I would say in other jurisdictions, we also have the ability to have an exemption for real estate taxes if we have certain levels of affordability in our project. That actually turns out to be worth a lot of money. Hard to do in the city of Boston because the assessor is pretty strong and hard-headed, and he doesn't want to give up the tax revenue, but that can really help us a lot. And then the last thing is in Somerville, not that far from where Drew lives, we're actually building a high-rise building as part of a public housing transformation where we actually struck a deal with a company based in the Netherlands to build a factory about 30 miles outside of the city of Boston. And they relocated here a couple of years ago. They opened their factory, and we're building a high-rise using modular technology that's imported from Europe at a cost that's about, I would say, 30% of the cost of 30% less than the building that we're building in Boston. Because it's built in a factory, the quality control is better. The time in Boston not building is going to take 2 years. In Somerville, it's going to take about a year. So time is money, literally, when you have to pay the bank to borrow the money. So we're looking at that technology to help drive down cost. And that's been also a lot of work with the city of Somerville and the state of Massachusetts building departments, so they can update their building codes to get ready for new technology, because we think in the future there's going to be a lot more of this.
So the process, right, that we all undergo when we start that project, the state of Massachusetts does not want to see an affordable housing unit created for more than $500,000. Every incremental dollar over $500,000 we call extraordinary cost, right? So you identify the wage premium, you identify the land premium, or the incremental costs that the permitting process added because you're building a park or you're building a road or there's some other community benefit that's being created, and that adds to the total development cost, which is getting fairly extreme, and we're always getting creative to find ways to save money. I challenge you all to try to capture the social benefit. If you can put a dollar amount on the social benefit of an affordable or a mixed income unit, we can take that and subtract it from our TDC. Because the communities that we're creating, I'm thinking right now of a project I'm about to start this summer. And in the multiple years that it went under, community review and then city review, some of the residents that I work with, who climb stairs, to their unit because there's not an accessible unit, or they have an underlying health condition or a disability. These residents are going to the ER like once, twice a year, right? And there's a true social cost to that, right? There's actual cost being incurred to the Boston Medical Center, right? That you're not seeing in our TDCs, because we're creating fully visitable units with accessibility to every floor and every amenity space. There's someone who may have missed taking a medication, right? Who needs a hospitalization, or an individual who isn't getting that next job or that next promotion because the educational opportunities aren't there. So while we can talk about the total development cost being very, very high, when you look at the communities that we're creating and the programs that we're bringing after the fact, did that cost or that burden, to the taxpayer, did that go down overall? And I think we can all argue yes. So maybe find us that answer, and we can we can sell that to the state and federal agencies.
Thank you all for sharing.
Just to add, I mean, the good news is that for all it takes to create an affordable unit, at least in this state, it really is affordable in perpetuity. And so, that is part of the equation in terms of that upfront enormous investment. But the restrictions on that unit, based on the funding programs from the state and the city and the federal government, mean that that unit will continue to be preserved for that income level over a very long period of time.
Drew, you kind of touched on meeting the needs of these diverse income groups in affordable housing, and given the $4 billion planned to be invested in the mixed income housing market in Boston today, do you think that extra funding will be of more assistance to those groups of people, or do you think it will just help combat these high costs of building?
The capital cost of creating a unit is very high, but making sure that you're investing in the programs, the social programs, to ensure that opportunity exists beyond just building the building, is an ongoing benefit of these communities. Ensuring that when we're underwriting the operating costs of a building, that we're factoring in, bringing in nonprofits and community providers to address healthcare concerns or education, or being able to provide, affordable childcare in the community. And so we talk about, yes, $4 billion is an enormous investment in the creation or the preservation of an affordable unit, but there's multiples of that. In Boston's and across Massachusetts, robust network of service providers that we're ensuring that the people who are living in these communities are receiving the types of services and programs that they need, because an affordable home, that may only help, a fraction of the things that are going on in their lives.
I'll take the $4 billion. I think cost of production is clearly an issue. I mean, I think the public sector has to take advantage of all the resources that they have. For example, public housing, and that just the land that they own is a valuable resource. We have done projects on parking lots that have been owned by the MBTA, kind of putting that land back into the tax rolls and creating affordable housing while we're doing that. We're now on the very early stages of planning an affordable housing project across the street from Beacon Hill in Boston, where we will be we will be recreating a public library on the first 2 floors of the building and doing 12 stories of affordable housing on top of it. I can't figure out a way to do it cheap. It's going to cost what it's going to cost. We've got a lot of sustainability components there that, over the life cycle of the building, it's very cost effective to spend the money up front. But when you kind of look at the first year cost, it's very high, but we don't plan on, having to tear it down and rebuild it in 30 years, which we have actually had to do in some cases in a number of cities where, buildings have reached the end of their useful life in an incredibly short period of time. And so we're hoping to learn from that and to build buildings that can last longer. It's just going to take that amount of investment. And hopefully we can take advantage of new building technologies. Someone once told me that if we brought a carpenter from, 1924 into 2024 into a site that we're building, he would be able to figure it out pretty easily because the technology has not changed that much. So we're looking forward to kind of a leap forward with AI and technologies from around the world and the opportunity to build in factories, and hopefully we can drive that cost curve down.
I would just add that I think there needs to be more conversion of existing buildings to affordable housing as well. And, unfortunately, some buildings and, many in the public housing portfolio have really gone beyond their useful life and really can't be reclaimed any cheaper than building a new unit. But I think throughout our city, there are many buildings that just have moderate physical needs that, could be targeted and converted to affordable housing, and we don't, need to completely rebuild and engage in all of the costs that goes along with new construction.
Well, thank you all for sharing your insights. I would now like to open it up to our audience today. Anyone has any questions?
Hi, thank you all for being here. It's been great to listen to your comments. My question is, what's your assessment of how the City of Boston and Mayor Wu's office are addressing policy changes to support mixed income housing, and how do you think that they could do better in the future?
Well, I would say a couple of really key policies, and they've been around for a while, but the Wu administration is really trying to put them on steroids, is inclusionary development and linkage, where inclusionary development means, if someone is building a straight market development, the city requires them to build a percentage of affordable units, and it's varied over time. It used to be 10%, and now it's upwards of, I think it's at 17%, plus some Section 8 requirements. It's hedging towards 20%. I think that's very critical. The money that comes in from commercial development throughout the city, which is, not in this moment what it used to be, but it will be again. Extracting some of that profit and proceeds, to apply to affordable housing, I think is also really, really critical. She has obviously tried very hard to resurrect the concept of rent control, or there's a better phrase for it now, I forget what it is, but the idea that we do need to regulate rents throughout the city. That unfortunately requires state approval, and so it's, politically it's been very difficult, but I think she's pushed it, not only because it's one of the tools that we can use, but just to continue to kind of bang the drum about the need to find other solutions for this issue. I don't know what you guys see.
Well, I would say I think there are going to be some very good improvements on the entitlement process. I'm hoping, and a lot more coordination. I think I've heard recently that the BPDA staff is going to now move over some kind of consolidated approach with the Mayor's Office of Housing, and so we won't have this, duplicative entitlement process where we're getting. I mean, when we did, give you a quick story. When we were doing the first phase of a project with the Housing Authority, I think I had 8 different design reviews. HUD, the City of Boston, the state, investors, the building department. There were 8 of them. It was totally unnecessary, and each one of those reviews cost money and time. So I think the mayor is committed to really trying to accelerate that process, which will be very helpful.
Yeah, the Squares and Streets initiative is really bold in being able to create, opportunities for density in locations that have great transit access and, mixed use ground floors with community amenities. I think that there's more that can be done. For every unit that we're producing, that's a new affordable housing unit. That's net new tax revenue. I think creative and flexible solutions as it relates to looking at taxes and maybe deferring or abating those for the first 10 or 15 years, so that we can actually borrow financing against that and increase private funding to a project and reduce the draw on linkage fees or on inclusionary development funds is I think something else that could be considered as well.
And I think one other thing is the project that Rodger mentioned before, where the city has kind of offered up this library, this public facility, which is a one-story building in a very high market neighborhood where there are buildings surrounding it that are of height. And so the city owns a lot of property and a lot of facilities, libraries, police stations, community centers, where that land isn't optimized in terms of what could exist. And so I think the administration's looking very hard at those kind of opportunities as well, to see, where can we take our own facilities and land where, we can cut out the cost of acquisition and be able to add units to those properties.
I think it's fitting, right, that we're on a college campus, but there's a lot of, private non-capital A affordable units that exist in existing housing stock that surround, Boston great universities. And a lot of those are, units that may be occupied by you all and your friends one day. I think, the city working with either private developers or the universities to build more dedicated student housing naturally will have those units in the neighborhoods, become available again, for families or individuals or roommates that want to live in the neighborhoods. I worked on a for sale project that was in Mission Hill. Mission Hill has a reputation of having a lot of student housing. And the neighborhood group there said that there was not going to be a single rental allowed. Even if you bought the unit, you couldn't rent it out. And you're seeing that pushback just against housing creation because there's a fear that it could be occupied one day by students. So I think working with the institutions and the universities to create more student housing, I think would also help alleviate some pressure.
Thank you all for sharing your insights. I just had a quick question. So for instance, can you elaborate more on like checks and balances that govern, all the financial things now? Because if I'm a private developer now, I see, announcements of like $4 billion coming, to Massachusetts and Boston. So I'll be like, interest rates are high, so I can get, subsidies, rent for like affordable housing for 15 years, and then I can rent it like market rate. Mm-hmm. So how do you ensure long-term sustainability of these projects?
A stack of paperwork that's maybe like this big when you're done with it. The projects and the individuals who are developing those projects are signing significant guarantees that if you're a bad boy actor and you say you're going to rent to someone who's of low income, but you're actually occupying it with a market rate renter and you're pocketing the difference, that is a serious issue. There's a lot of checks and balances in place at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, at your investor level, at your lender level. I don't think I missed anyone, right? The multiple investors, the multiple lenders that make sure that you're on track.
I would say frequently a number of deals that we do with public entities are actually done on ground leases, and those ground leases have restrictions as to what can be put on the ground and what must be affordable in a term, and the affordability terms that in some cases are longer than the terms that come with our financing. For example, I think at Whittier it's forever, and in Washington D.C. we're doing a large public housing deal where the ground lease will require that all the units are affordable below 80% of AMI forever. And if they're not, if we somehow default, it'll go back to the housing authority, we'll be gone, and they'll have the opportunity to run it.
There's a really fun, I think, legal term, right? I think in the U.S. you can't actually have a ground lease that says forever, but it says something like multiple generations after the last heir of King Charles, something like, like that's a true legal term. Then it talks about the crown, in the UK as your length of period.
Otherwise known as forever.
That's otherwise known as forever.
Yeah, and so those restrictions are real, and as Drew said, I mean, there's hundreds of legal documents that are in play for all of those deals, but that's also contributing to the cost of construction. So, it does have that downside where, I mean, the protections need to be there, absolutely, but it also, there's a lot of lawyering that happens in these deals, and it's expensive. And for some developers, I think it's a disincentive to enter the world of developing affordable housing. I mean, there's a fairly small group of developers in Boston that do that work because it's extremely complicated and it comes with, a lot of just all that legal work.
Hi, thank you for speaking with us today. I was wondering what kind of each of your personal stories were and like what kind of got you into this industry.
Well, I had a kind of a previous life in high tech when I graduated college, but I found that I really wanted to go to architecture school, and once I was in architecture school, decided really urban planning was more what I was looking for, and so I went and got a graduate degree in planning. And really, I've been in affordable housing ever since then. I worked for the city of Newton for a little while and the city of Chelsea on the municipal side, working in affordable housing programs, mostly, lending money to folks that were developing housing from the city side of things. And then moved to the Boston Housing Authority, where I spent 25 years. I recently left there, was the director there for about 4 or 5 years. For me, public housing was an amazing intersection of, affordable housing, issues around poverty, urban design, community building, just many, construction, many factors that I just found fascinating working together. And they're just, extraordinary communities. And I never intended to stay as long as, when I went to BHA, I thought I'd do this for 2 years, and 25 years later.
Got you stuck around.
Yeah. So I sort of wandered into it in that way.
I actually also was in high tech when I got out of college, but only for 2 years. I worked for a Fortune 500 company, and after 2 years, I was pretty sure that I wasn't cut out to be a company man, a corporate guy. And I came back and talked to some of my professors at Dean's at BC, and they kind of counseled me, and they figured out that after I talked to them, they thought it would be interesting, or I would be interested in city planning. So I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship to graduate school, and they paid my tuition, but the flip side of it is I had to volunteer 1 day a week in a governmental agency or a nonprofit. And I chose a nonprofit, a small one in the south end of Boston, where I got to work with high school kids, rehabbing a building. And I kind of loved it. I could actually see a building and touch it and make something change and work with young kids. And that kind of started a whole series of conversations that ended up with me going to a bigger nonprofit and then a for-profit, but always in this space. Because I enjoyed it. Every day is different. One day I'm dealing with Kate, and the next day I'm dealing with politicians or architects or engineers, or actually the most fun that I've had, and I don't get to do it much anymore, is working with resident organizations and residents to help them kind of vocalize what their vision is for their community, and then help them make that happen. And that's kind of, that gives me the most joy out of anything that I do in my practice.
I have spent my entire real estate career at Win. I had a 2-year stint right out of college working for a food and drink startup in New York. But I grew up in the Boston area. We got the Globe every day, and one day a week there was, 2 articles on the back of the business section on real estate and, primarily commercial real estate development. I was just so drawn to it. People transforming skylines or vacant lots or, creating infill opportunities. And I just have always been drawn to that space of creating, and ended up cold calling Win, and I did a year-long adult internship living at home with my dad, and it transitioned into a full-time opportunity about 10 years ago, and I love it. There's no 2 days are the same. You overcome a challenge, and you're so grateful that you now know that that's never going to happen again. But don't worry, there's like 15 other challenges after it. So it's a never-ending, string of problem solving, which I think is just fascinating and stimulating.
Thank you for coming to speak with us. I know you were saying earlier some of the neighborhoods you face opposition for building affordable housing. When you are able to get support in those neighborhoods where you face resistance to begin with, are there extra steps you take to cultivate the welcoming community that you were speaking about that can be so helpful and socially beneficial in the affordable housing communities?
I think starting with a listening exercise is the most important step, because we're not building projects in the middle of the woods where no one lives. We're not building projects in the middle of abandoned farmland where you have no neighbors or abutters. There are people that live on that street. There are people that walk by that lot. There's people who grew up in that community, and making sure that, to Rodger's point, that you're creating a shared vision with those community members, those stakeholders, can often build not only support for a project, but when there is opposition, someone other than the developer is speaking up for the benefits that will come with that project.
I would just say, we have, as a result of an experience that we had in Chicago, where we had a lot of opposition to a neighborhood transformation plan. We were proposing a very troubled project that had homeowners adjacent to it. And they were very much opposed to having us kind of rescue that project. We actually hired people from Chicago in the neighborhood, and we had ambassadors, and they worked with those neighbors. I mean, early on, they had signs posted in their house windows that had the name of our company with a red circle and a slash through it. And today, those very same people are big supporters of ours, because we communicated with them a lot, and we actually did what we said we were going to do. And so it made a huge difference. And I would just say communicate and dedicate the resources to have real community engagement. It's not free. You really have to be intentional about it, but it does work a lot of the times, not always.
Yeah, I think these themes of engagement and listening and communication are just key to success in this kind of field. And I think that it's important to enjoy that interaction, to work in this field, and want to be in it and want to continue to do the work, and to be able to relate to a very diverse set of stakeholders is really critical, and kind of hear where they're all coming from. And at the end of the day, you can't please everybody, But it really comes back in the case of an existing group of residents that are living someplace, it's key that they are at the table, that they are helping, as Rodger has said, with the visioning of what their community should look like in the future, with some of the decision making. They can't make all the decisions about the finance and some of the technical aspects, but there are many things that they can help make decisions about, and I think that really helps. And that goes for the broader community as well. I mean, the broader community sometimes wants to be engaged in a way that they're invested, and to find ways to kind of allow that to happen is important.
Can I just add a quick follow-up to that? So how do you think that process reflects democratic process in the United States compared to this sort of development happening elsewhere in the world? That level of community engagement.
Well, I don't proclaim to be an expert on development in other countries, but I am familiar with many residents in BHA housing who have come from other countries, who are astounded at the level of participation that is afforded them in this process, where they may come from a country where they're not consulted in this way. And it kind of can be a challenge sometimes to get those folks to really speak up at the table, because they think there may be consequences for that. So I'm not sure how it happens other places. I only have that point of reference.
Yeah, I haven't done out of the country as well, but I've worked with a number of housing authorities across this country. And I would say, not because she's sitting here, but the Boston Housing Authority has done a great job in the projects that I've seen in educating the residents and really hiring resources to come and sit with residents to teach them about urban planning and massing and density. So as a developer, when I show up, they've already been gotten an education in kind of preliminary site planning and what the buildings are going to look like and how big and tall they should be and how they should be relating to each other on the site. I think you actually hired an architect, a series of architects.
Sometimes we provide architects, lawyers, other technical consultants for the residents, to work for the residents, to represent them, because they can't be expected to know everything they need to know about the process.
And that does not happen in other American cities, where the housing authority frequently has a more adversarial relationship with their resident population because they're not committed and intentional in the way the Boston Housing Authority is.
I'll take the opposite end of that argument, right? So all the opportunities for community engagement and participation also can create obstacles and opportunities to derail a project or a process, or at an enormous expense, or water down the development, to a unit count that's just untenable. There's been some interesting studies, not looking at housing, but generally infrastructure and what is built in this country. And if you look at the cost of infrastructure, adjusted for inflation, it's gone up exponentially since we passed really important legislation, such as NEPA and other environmental reviews. But when you go through an environmental review at the local level, then at the state level, and then at the federal level, and then to Rodger's point, you have conflicting feedback, from 8 different reviews, and the ability, for anyone to file an appeal, that also hurts the process, right? So I think public participation, community participation, education is really important, but I think there's also some opportunities to maybe rein that in a little bit, or formalize it in a more streamlined process. So.
I know you mentioned the prospect of converting existing buildings into units like this, and I know there's an influx in vacant office space in Boston. What is that like something that's being seriously looked into, or like what are the challenges that come with converting spaces as opposed to creating new ones?
So I'm actively looking at converting a historic office building in Worcester into housing, and we're fortunate because of its age, right? It's not this mega block that it was maximizing floor plates. It was built, when you're maximizing light wells and proximity to windows, which actually works really well for a housing conversion. One of the challenges, though, is making sure that the window fenestration is such that it allows, for a residential code. So many storefront windows, right? All these windows here in this room don't look operable, right? This would require pretty significant cost to replace that window so it's operable, so that you can have access to fresh air for that unit. And so there's certain conversion targets that are a lot more efficient and can kind of lower the capital needed to be invested. But at the same time, you need to, I think, you're beginning to see an uptick in proposals in Boston for office to residential conversion. But it requires the existing owner, whether it's an individual, it's a bank that took it in foreclosure, or an investment firm, to come to the realization that, maybe the financing they have in place is actually greater than the value of the building itself. And so, as values come down, I think opportunities for conversion will rise.
I would just add that I think that the current city administration is looking very hard at some of the downtown office buildings. But there hasn't emerged yet a real strategy or a feasible plan around converting some of them.
More questions?
Hi, thank you all. I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the social benefits that you talked about earlier on. So, thinking about benefits to institutional resources like schools in these mixed income communities, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the linkage between schools and mixed income housing and how you see that playing out, because theoretically, it's been discussed that mixed income housing can lead to mixing within schools and benefits to school quality improvements, but in actuality, sometimes we don't see that playing out. So I'm just wondering, from your all expertise, what you might suggest there for more of a logistical approach to that school to housing connection.
That's a great question. And I think, in my experience, the connection between a city's housing authority and a city's school system is really critical, and I don't think it's optimized in Boston. Partly because of the biggest challenge in Boston, which is there aren't neighborhood schools really. And so in any development that I was working in, kids were going to 50 different schools, literally 50 different schools across the city. And so it's hard to have a relationship between a housing development and schools when that's the case. You guys own more mixed income housing and may see sort of, I guess, how that plays out.
I've experienced the same thing. Like, we are doing a project in Washington, D.C. It's ultimately will be a 1,400 unit community. It started off as 400 public housing units. And so we did an inventory when we got on site. Who lives there? What do they do? What are the key demographic statistics that we need to know? And so we asked, for a list of the schools that the kids went to. Out of the 440 families there, the kids literally went to over 100 schools in DC. The busiest time at the subway station near that community was at 8 in the morning when all the kids went to the subway station to go to school. So the idea of actually being able to, have a neighborhood school was kind of a myth. Now, we hope that by working intensively with the residents on education programs, in DC, they have kind of a lottery system for determining where your kids go to school. And so, the residents, the parents that are more engaged kind of dominate the lottery process. So we're hoping that as our residents come back, it's more stable community. They can hold us more accountable for the condition of their housing and the condition of their neighborhood, that they'll work with our community impact workers, and we can help them kind of figure out how to negotiate the lottery system in the city of Washington that will benefit them. And maybe if we're lucky, we might be able to talk someone into doing a neighborhood school, since we're doing this neighborhood transformation.
There was a recent study that was published on the success of the METCO program in Greater Boston, which brings students from Boston neighborhoods to surrounding schools and communities of opportunity. And at Win, we both develop in big cities, but we also develop in small towns where there's only one elementary school, one middle school, one high school. And I think as a Commonwealth, and this started with the MBTA Communities Act and other legislation, we need to be more targeted in the projects that we're pursuing and the locations that we're pursuing, so that you are creating mixed income housing in those neighborhoods or in those communities of opportunity. There are extra points available in the tax credit programs if you're building in those areas, and the state wants to make sure that it's not age-restricted housing, that there's a certain number of 2 and 3 bedrooms for families with school-age children. But often those are the projects that face the greatest opposition. We got sued multiple times in Swampscott. We're probably going to get sued down on the Cape. We barely got through in Shrewsbury. Those are the types of projects that cost a lot of money. They take a lot of time, but they're the educational opportunities are already there, right? Because those communities have been investing in their schools for a very long time.
I do think your question speaks to a missed opportunity with a lot of, not just public housing, but, housing developments in general. The housers know who's living in their site. They know the ages of the kids. They know the demographics. They may know where they go to school. And I don't think there's enough of a connection between, those housers and the school system in general.
Thank you to our audience for your questions and being here today. And thank you to our amazing speakers for educating us more on the mixed income housing market.